Hey everybody, it's Mark Vo with VOGTLAND Outdoors. I got a comment earlier this week from a new subscriber named Gary. Gary, this is for you. Gary asked the question, hey, I like the string walking method. Does draw weight determine what those string walking gaps should be? And I quickly said yes, because that was the only choice that he gave me. But it's not really about draw weight, guys. It's about arrow speed. It's about arrow speed. So it's about how fast the bow is. And that's the one thing where draw weight just doesn't really describe what's going on. In this episode, we're going to talk about the difference between draw weight and string gap. But what we're really going to be talking about is the difference between draw weight and arrow speed and string walking gap. In string walking, you create a gap between the nocking point of the arrow and the drawing point of your index finger. That gap, by controlling that gap, you're controlling the elevation of the arrow from the rear of the arrow instead of from the front of the arrow. That with a set of pin sights on the sight, with a front sight of some kind, I should say, like with Olympic recurve bows or with compound bows, you're controlling the elevation of the arrow from the front by fixing the rear and by tipping the front of the arrow up or down by looking through a different set of pins. The highest pin on your sight is going to give you the lowest elevation. The lowest pin on your sight is going to give the highest elevation of the arrow. But the rear of the arrow stays fixed and the front moves back and forth. In string walking, the front of the arrow stays fixed and the rear of the arrow is what you actually change in order to get that same elevation. Now the question that Gary asked was, does the draw weight of the bow determine what these gaps are for a particular distance? And the answer is kind of yes. But that's only because draw weight of a bow is loosely correlated to the arrow speed that that bow can impart on the arrow, that it can force that arrow to go. That a higher draw weight bow typically is going to push an arrow faster through the air. And then it becomes all about ballistic motion. That if the arrow is continually dropping over a certain distance, the gravity is operating on it, then the amount that it drops is going to be determined by how fast the arrow is moving over that fixed distance. If you pick a distance like 20 meters, if the arrow moves slowly, horizontally through the air, but gravity continues to operate on it to influence it, then it's going to actually drop a great deal of height over that 20 meters. In sharp contrast, if the arrow is moving very quickly through the air and gravity is still a constant and operates at the same amount of, it's going to be able to operate for a shorter amount of time on that arrow over that fixed 20 meters. So you end up with the arrow dropping less for a faster arrow and dropping more for a slower arrow. The faster arrow typically comes from a higher draw weight bow. And the slower arrow typically comes from a lower draw weight bow, something like 20 pounds versus 55 pounds. Now what I wanted you guys to understand is this: you can have a bow, two different bows, 55 pounds and 45 pounds. And the 45-pound bow can actually have more power. It can actually make the arrow go faster. It depends on how swift the limbs are and what they're made out of. And this is what everybody understood even since 7,000 years ago. They understood that they needed to make something that wasn't just strong, but it was quick. It had to be able to impart it had to have a lot of power. It had to be able to translate that stored up energy into the arrow in a very short amount of time. It had to be quick to do it, not slow. Could you build a bow out of a rake handle? Yes, but it's not necessarily going to be fast. There's so much mass in that handle that the limbs move slowly, and even though it takes a lot of energy, a lot of force rather, to pull the arrow, to pull the bow to full draw, it's actually going to release very slowly too. So there's not a lot of energy that goes into the arrow. That's the point I was trying to make, Gary, about draw weight is only loosely correlated to the arrow speed. And that what archery, the secret to good bow making throughout the millennia, has always been, can you make a bow limb that's light but very, very springy and very, very fast? Because the faster that limb can move, the more energy, the more momentum it can impart into the arrow, the faster the arrow goes. And if the faster the arrow goes, either the longer the distance you're going to get, or the smaller the drop over a fixed distance. So in today's demonstration, I actually got my daughter's bow, which is a 22 pounder, and I've got one of my Martin Jaguars, around 58 pounds. I'm going to need a very steep angle on a low draw weight bow to get the same distance as a much wider gap on a very, very large bow, because I don't need to worry about the arrow dropping very far over that short distance, that 20 meters. Let's get set up on the target here so you guys can actually see. The first thing that I'm going to shoot is the 22 pounder with the same arrow. Okay, we're going to start off with this 20, what is it? I don't even know if it says. I think it's a 25 pound bow. I pull out to about 28. So it's a roughly double. I misspoke earlier when I said my other bow is 3 times heavier. It's only 2 times heavier, 2 times stronger. This is going to be roughly 28 pounds versus 56. So what I'm going to choose is a 1.5 finger gap. It's going to be 1.5 fingers that looks like this. That when I shoot, it's going to look like this, a steeper angle. In order for a weaker bow, a slower arrow speed getting imparted to the arrow means it's going to drift and fall down faster over 20 meters. There's going to be a bigger drop because of the slower speed, the arrow speed. So I need to be able to aim a little higher in order to hit the center of the target. Let's see this in action. Step 1, choose your gap. Step 2, draw back under, anchor under your chin. Step 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. Step 4, put the tip of the arrow right smack on the target. Step 5, step 5, step 5, step 5, make a small motion release. Let's shoot 2 more arrows for some consistency and take a look at it. Again, step 1, choose your gap, 1.5 fingers, a relatively small gap. Step 2, anchor under your chin. Step 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. Step 4, put the tip of the arrow right smack on the target. Step 5, step 5, step 5, step 5, small motion release. Let's do a third one. Step 1, choose your gap, 1.5 fingers. Step 2, anchor under your chin. Step 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. Step 4, tip of the arrow right on the target. Step 5, step 5, step 5, step 5, small motion release. Clear? You don't need to actually see those, although you can see from the flight. They landed near the center, about like this. Actually, lightweight bows tend to be more sensitive to your release, so shooting early in the morning when you didn't practice, you're going to get more variation. But you get the idea. Next, we're going to pull those arrows and we're going to shoot my 58 pound bow, and we're going to see I need a much bigger gap. Okay, the next bow I'm going to shoot is my Martin Jaguar that has, what's it say? I've pulled this. It pulls about 58 pounds. So roughly twice the draw weight of that smaller bow. So that what I'm going to need, since it's going to theoretically shoot the arrow twice as fast, the arrow speed is going to be going twice as fast at the same distance. That means it's going to drop a lot less, which means I only need to actually tip the back up a little bit. I only need to tip the front up a little bit in order for that little bit of drop to land it in the center of the target. I'm going to need a 1, 2, 3 finger gap to start, and let's see how that goes. This is going to go faster because I can't hold the draw like that. It's going to be, let's try one more time. I'm not going to be able to sit and talk at full draw with 55 pounds. So I'm just going to, step 1, choose the gap. Step 2, anchor under my chin. 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. 4, put the tip of the arrow right on the center of the blue. Step 5, make a small motion release. Here goes. And we'll see it's close to center. Let's do one more. Three finger gap. What you see is that I needed a 3 finger gap on that arrow, on that shot, because in fact the arrow was moving twice as fast. So I only needed a little bit of tilt instead of a lot of tilt for a slower arrow. Gary, I hope this explains the difference between draw weight, or the correlation between draw weight of the bow and the string walking gap that you need for a particular distance. For a larger, stronger bow, a higher draw weight bow, you need a larger gap because you're not going to be elevating the arrow up nearly as far. For a lower draw weight bow, you're going to need a smaller gap, which pulls the back of the arrow down, which tips the front of the arrow up, which gives you a larger distance because it's going to be in the air longer because it's not moving as fast. And that the string walking gap is really all about the arrow speed, and the arrow speed really is only loosely tied to the draw weight of the bow. For the last thing that I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go and pick a 35 pound bow right in the middle, and we're going to find out, because the limbs are springing and fast, it ends up being able to impart the same arrow speed onto this arrow as this 55 pound slower. It's stronger, but it's a slower bow. The limbs are heavier, they don't move as fast, and I'll actually use the same 3 finger string walking gap on a 35 pound bow. Let's check it out. Clear. Okay, last bow. This is that Junxing bow, recurve bow for $104 on Amazon that I reviewed and unboxed earlier this summer, and I'm just tickled to death shooting it. So I find myself shooting it a lot. This one pulls out to about 45 pounds. So we had one that pulled out to about 30, about 45, and about 60. So that what this one should have is not a string walking gap of 3, not a string walking gap of 1.5, but it should be somewhere in between 1.5 and 3, 2 and something. But what you find out is it actually ends up having a string walking gap of 3 fingers to shoot 20 meters. Why would that be? It's because these limbs, they're able to actually transfer the potential energy stored up in that full draw. Even though there's less energy, they can actually transmit it more efficiently into the arrow, so the arrow ends up going the same speed as if it's coming out of the 58 pound bow. Very interesting stuff. And now you guys are all looking and saying, so that's been the secret with archery throughout the millennia, is who can build the fastest limbs, meaning they have to be lightweight and springy. They have to be able to store energy quite all right, but even a rock can store energy theoretically. Even a fence post can store energy. You can bend it a little bit, but can it release that energy quickly into the arrow? That's what this is all about, is developing that technology of layering the bow, layering the limbs with different kinds of glues, etc. throughout the ages, and give it that springiness without the mass to slow it down. 45 pound bow, not 30, not 60, but still a 3 finger gap like a 60 pound bow, because even though it carries less energy at full draw, it can release that energy more quickly, more efficiently into the arrow to get the same arrow speed as a 60 pound bow. Therefore, it uses the same gaps for each distance as a 60 pound bow. A slower 60 pound bow. God, this is a lovely bow. This is so quick. Every time I shoot it, I'm just blown away. In fact, it shot a little high. I'm going to use it like a 3 1/8 finger gap. It's so balanced. So there you see it. 3 different bows, 3 different draw weights, but actually different efficiencies, different levels of power. That the middle draw weight, the 45-pound bow, had the same gap as the 60-pound bow, not because they have the same draw weight, quite different, 45 versus almost 60 pounds, but because it's a more efficient bow. The limbs are lower mass but the same stiffness, so they can impart more energy, of stored energy, into the arrow and achieve the same arrow speed. So I keep saying the same thing over again, but let's just summarize it. The string walking gap is sort of correlated, sort of tied to the draw weight, but there are bows that have different draw weights but still have the same power, the same ability to impart the same ability to impart a certain amount of energy into the arrow to get a certain arrow speed, and ultimately it's the arrow speed that determines the gap. It takes a little bit. We can still do really well using the draw weight as a guide, because it's not like from bow to bow to bow some bows are 3 or 4 or 5 times more efficient. They're more like 10% more efficient, 20% more efficient, not twice as efficient or 3 times as efficient, which is why we can use a correlation of draw weight to string walking gap. This is Mark with VOGTLAND Outdoors. Gary, I hope you found this even remotely useful. The rest of you, I hope you found it useful too. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and see you out there. Cut!